Now we have this circle constructor with two members, the radius property and the draw method, just like before, and we have two circle objects. So let's log these objects on the console. C1, here's our object. We have this draw method. Let's log C2. And you can see we have this draw method here as well. So with the current implementation, if we have, let's say, 1,000 circle objects in the memory, we're going to have 1,000 copies of the draw method. Now, this is a very simplified example. In a real-world application, your objects might have several methods. So if you want to have a large number of these objects in the memory, you're going to waste a lot of memories by keeping copies of all these methods. So what's the solution? Well, you know how prototypical inheritance works. When we access a property or a method on an object, JavaScript engine first looks at the object itself. If it can't find that property or method, it will look at the prototype of that object. So now we can take this draw method out of the circle object and put it in its prototype. We're going to have a single instance of this prototype in the memory, which we call circle base. So we're going to have a single instance of the draw method. So how do we do that? Well, in the last lecture, you learned that every constructor has a prototype property. So circle.prototype. And this is exactly the same as the prototype of our circle objects. So for C1, let's say if we access the proto property, which we shouldn't because it's deprecated, but essentially these two properties are referencing the same object in memory. That's the circle base. So using circle.prototype, we can quickly and safely access this object. So you know that JavaScript objects are dynamic, so we can always add something to them later. So we can add the draw method here and simply move the implementation right here. And with that, we no longer need the draw method on the object instance itself. Save. So now let's log our circles one more time. C1. This object only has a radius property. The draw method is on the prototype, the circle base object, right? And the same is true for C2. Again, we don't have the draw method, it's on the prototype. Now, because of the prototypical inheritance, we can still access it. So we can call c1.draw and everything works. So essentially we have two kinds of properties and methods in JavaScript. We have instance properties and methods. Let's call them instance members and prototype members. Now let's take this to the next level. So you know that every object has this toString method. So c1.toString, by default, it returns this string here. We can overwrite the implementation of this method in the prototype of our circle objects. So here I'm gonna add circle.prototype.toString, set it to a new function. And here we're gonna return circle with radius. Now we need to access the radius property. So we can use this dot radius. Save the changes. Now c1.toString. And this is the new implementation. So back to our prototypical inheritance, when we call this method, JavaScript engine looks at our circle object. Obviously, we don't have this method there. Then it looks at its prototype. So circle.prototype. We have implemented this method here. So this implementation will be used. So here's the interesting part. Even though we have another implementation of the toString method on object base, but this implementation will be used because this is more accessible. So this is all about instance versus prototype members. And by the way, remember that in both these kind of members, you can reference other members. For example, in the draw method, which is a prototype method, I can easily call an instance method on the circle class. So let's add a method here, call it this.move. We set it to a function, console.log of move. Now we can reference this function or this method more accurately in our prototype method. So this.move and then console.log of draw. So let's test this. c1.draw. And here are our two messages, move and draw. By the same token, in an instance method, we can reference a prototype member. So let's reverse this. Here, before moving the circle, we want to draw it. So we call this.draw. Now, essentially what is happening here, we're calling the draw method. Obviously, it's not an instance method. So the JavaScript engine will find this method on the prototype. So everything will continue to work. To demonstrate this, let's go back to the draw method. We shouldn't call move because otherwise we'll have a circular dependency. So delete this, save the changes. Now c1.move. So we have draw and move.